You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com.
Okay, hi everybody. This is Nadira Jamal, and welcome to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. And thanks so much for your patience while we work through our technical issues. I really appreciate you sticking around. So the Clubhouse is a place where dancers and dance geeks especially can get all that information that's hard to get in classes and on DVDs. So every month I'm going to interview a different guest expert on a different topic, and we'll always have time for questions and answers so you can geek out with my guests too. So if you think that knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you're in the right place. So my guest for this month is Mahin. Mahin is a professional performer and instructor who teaches in Phoenix, Arizona, and in workshops nationally. She's the author of the internationally acclaimed Belly Dance Quickies publication, and she also holds a Bachelor of Science in Exercise and Wellness and is an ACSM certified certified personal trainer. And today Mahin is going to talk about dancing safe and strong, fitness, injury prevention, and improving your dance with exercise. And as somebody who's had 6 injuries in 4 years, this is a topic that's very close to my heart. So thank you so much for coming, Mahin.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks. Now, fitness is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, and people mean lots of different things by that. But as a fitness professional, what does that mean to you?
Well, when we talk about fitness in scientific terms, we're really talking about 5 different areas of fitness. So I'll go through them quickly, and then I'll go back and talk a little bit more about what each one is and how we use these things in belly dance. So the first one is your cardiovascular fitness. And the second one is muscular strength. You also have muscular power, muscular endurance, and then, of course, flexibility. So 4 of these have to do with our muscular system and 1 with our cardiovascular system. So with the cardiovascular fitness, what we're meaning is our ability to sustain activity, the ability of your heart to consistently, pump the larger amounts of blood needed to deliver oxygen to muscles, and also to a certain degree the ability of your muscles to use the oxygen is being delivered efficiently, and that kind of plays into the muscular endurance end as well. So for dancers, we really do need a lot of cardiovascular endurance, especially if you're taking a lot of classes, if you have long rehearsals, and if you are performing, if you're a performer and you do the typical 25, 30-minute club set, you really need to be able to keep it up. Because, I actually, I had to argue this point with a professor when I was in a college program, and he said dancers weren't athletes, which pretty much raised my blood pressure quite a bit. And then he said, well, they don't compete. So, well, yes, they do. They don't run. They don't, have marathon events and this and that and the other thing. So, well, yeah, I said, but a marathon runner or a runner in a race can cross the finish line, be draggled with their last breath that they have on them, and fall across the finish line and finish. We have to finish, look graceful, be beautiful, not be breaking too much of the sweat, and smile, and leave gracefully. So we really need more cardiovascular fitness than is required in a performance. So you need to be prepared for much more so that the amount you're doing doesn't look like a huge effort. The second thing, muscular strength. Now, of course, that's the ability of your muscles to produce force. And the more you use it, the better it gets. The less you use it, the weaker you get, of course. So you use it or lose it kind of a philosophy, that whole theory holds true. And this strength, this is what gives, through the different muscle groups, which we'll go through in a little bit, is what gives integrity to our movement. It gives stability, it keeps us safe, it allows us to support certain things that we do that require flexibility in one area of the body, but strength to hold the stability of the position in another area of the body, with things like back bends and level changes and floor work and things like that. So the third area, muscular power, this isn't something that we really use a lot of in belly dance. This is the kind of power that is not only to produce a lot of force, but to produce it quickly. And if you think of someone like a power lifter is the classic example that you might have, where they have to lift that really heavy barbell and they have to have to get it up there quickly. Or if you ever see people doing like plyometrics, which is that like depth jumps and things where they're like jumping up onto a box, they're producing that force, but they have to do it very quickly. So not something we so much have a need for in dance. But on the other things with muscles, like the endurance is really applicable for us because this is the ability for your muscles to work repeatedly, to have a sustained effort, and this is the one that ties in with your cardiovascular fitness, because your blood is what delivers the oxygen to the muscles, but the muscles need to be ready to use it. So this is a training effect that the more you work at your fitness, the more efficient that your muscles get at using the oxygen that is being delivered. So this is one of the things that, this kind of symbiotic relationship between these two things that allows our bodies to dance longer, to dance more consistently. And I think one of the biggest places that we see this kind of thing is with shimmies, with endurance in your quads and your hamstrings when you're shimmying. Now, part of that is actually a neuromuscular thing, but we can also talk about that in a little bit. But muscular endurance itself, that feeling of your muscles are burning and you need to quit, that buildup of that lactic acid in your muscles, that when your muscles have better endurance, that lactic threshold there is pushed way further back, so you can do a whole lot more before you give out. Mm-hmm. And the last one, of course, the fifth element is flexibility. And this is huge for us because flexibility is the thing that gives us grace in all of our movements. It increases the size of our movements, and when you're leaning or having more flexibility within your core will allow your figure eights and other hip shapes to have a little more range. And it also allows you to do some of the more extreme things like back bends and Turkish drops and it's in your balancing and things like that. And, of course, in your flexibility, you need a flexibility in your shoulders to do veil work that remains graceful and, and has a good open feel, or to handle props. So these are the traditionally seen as the 5 elements of fitness: cardiovascular fitness, muscular strength, muscular power, muscular endurance, and muscular flexibility.
Gotcha. And so, we've talked a little bit about how those elements apply to belly dance. Are there any specific examples that you'd like to give us?
Well, like I said, the one classic example is with your shimmies. Your ability, if you've ever done a really long shimmy drill, it can kind of get your heart rate up, So with shimmies, there's several things that come into play. So when we talk about when people are learning to shimmy, they have to develop endurance in their leg muscles, and they also have to develop the neural system that communicates with those muscles. When people do weight training or any kind of physical activity, the whole first 2 weeks or so of progress and gains that they usually get are not necessarily about building new muscles, but about more efficient recruitment of the muscle fibers that they already have. Mm. So that is the nervous system improving its ability to communicate to each of the bundles of muscle fibers, each motor unit. So that's one of the reasons why. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why. You've probably seen this with your students, they'll shimmy, and then all of a sudden it's like their knees freeze. And it's like, I didn't tell them to stop. What happened? And so then we see this a lot. I mean, if you ever try to learn a new shimmy, like something other than what your go-to shimmy is, you can still even experience this. And you have to work through that. You have to hit that little stopping point. You have to do it again. You need to go and go and go, and eventually that your ability to shimmy consistently gets better because your muscles get more used to the activity. Your nervous system is wiring itself better. It's communicating more efficiently, and the whole thing just goes more smoothly. And then once you've got it down, then you can add the complicating factor of doing that shimmy while you're doing a figure eight or a Maya or any other thing you want to do. I was listening to where was I? Oh, when I was in Philly, I was teaching workshops last summer. I happened to be scanning late night through these TV channels, and I happened to stumble upon this PBS special or something about the brain, and one of the things that the man said just really stuck. It's muscles that fire together, wire together, and that's so true with dance. And that's your whole muscle memory thing. It's the reason why when we teach one movement, we have to draw attention to all the things about the upper body that are happening, even though it's a hip movement. Because when it fires together, all of the muscles involved get involved in the whole wiring in your brain and the way your brain records and stores this movement. So it's important to make sure that all the parts, not even just the obvious parts, are doing what they're supposed to do. So that's what we, without the scientific terms, call learning good habits.
Cool. Yeah, in the last couple of years I've been reading, there were a whole slew of books out lately about the development of talent, and a lot of them talk about a process called myelination. I imagine that's related to what you're doing, and essentially the idea is that whatever it is that you practice in certain ways, your brain optimizes the circuitry that supports that so that it can do it fast and without heavy influence. It sounds like that's something that might be related to this process.
Yes, myelination is actually what that is that myelin is basically an insulation layer that's around a nerve. Okay, and the more insulated that is, the faster the signal travels. Is basically the short version of it. So when you talk about people who have like my dad, for example, my dad has multiple sclerosis, and what that is it's a deterioration of the myelin in certain places on the nerve, which means that the signal can kind of get detoured, leave the nerve, and go to another nerve, which means that you wind up with muscular dysfunction. Sometimes you wind up with atrophy or loss of a function because the signal's not carrying properly. So, again, yes, it's very true. The repeated use of a skill that involves coordination and a fine motor function or gross motor function, all of these things, the body adapts to all of these things. I mean, it's amazing. We really hardly understand, basically even scratching the surface of what really is going on with all of this. But yes, myelinization increases the speed and efficiency of a nerve, and so that's one way it can be looked at. Yeah.
Cool. So another thing that occurred to me a little bit is you talked about firing muscle fiber bundles, and this probably is not quite the same thing that you were talking about. But when I was in physical therapy for my second injury, it was an abdominal injury, and it was actually a pretty bad one, and it took months and months and months of recovery and physical therapy. And a lot of the problem I was having as I healed was that we essentially had to re-recruit all these smaller muscles that I had stopped using while I was trying to essentially hold myself still to protect this injury. And one thing that my physical therapist talked about a lot was that, when we were doing a lot of these stability exercises, I'd get this kind of bounce in the belly. And she said, that's good. We're, teaching your muscles to organize themselves. And so this idea of things working in coordination as opposed to in single pieces also seems like something.
Yeah, well, actually, it's the same process, but that is in a negative sense. Because what happens to some people when they have a chronic injury or they have an injury that they neglect and try to work around and dance around and adapt rather than treat and heal, is you'll wind up compensating. So for someone maybe who has an issue with one ankle, they're going to compensate and they're going to put more stress on leaning on the other foot. You see it with a limp, for example. But what happens is when you use your muscles in a compensated way and you do it for long enough because you're trying to protect the thing that's injured, your body's really super efficient. We don't even think about these things, but it just does these things for us because it's trying to avoid pain because that's a primal signal in the brain. So we basically train our muscles to protect rather than to work efficiently and symmetrically the way they're supposed to work. And that can lead to all kinds of things. It can lead to muscle loss in the muscle that we're protecting because it's not being used. Use it or lose it. It can lead to overdevelopment in the muscles that are being gut protectors, which can put strain in kind of an bad angles or improper angles on a joint because they're pulling more than they really should be pulling, you know. So there's all kinds of complicated factors when you think about the construction of you know, beams and bands, and if, you know, one of the bands is the tension isn't right, all of a sudden the alignment just comes off, you know, the alignment falls out of where it's supposed to be. And that's sometimes what we do to ourselves when we compensate with an injury.
Mm-hmm. This is really fascinating to me, but I'd like to also step a little bit into, you know, the injury prevention space. And obviously one of the things that's a big part of injury prevention is proper stretching, but it seems like there's a lot of misinformation, or at least conflicting information, about how stretching should fit into our routine. So again, you're an exercise professional and you've got a lot of information about this. What would you say as an official answer?
Well, before we get into the stretching thing, I have to say something about dancers and injuries. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I really feel like somebody's got to come out there and say it. If you've been on Buzz for any amount of time, if you're on Facebook for any amount of time, or if you've been a long time and you remember and you've been on Tribe, people get on there and they say, I have a pain in my fill in the blank when I fill in the blank, and they go on there and then everybody pipes up with, oh, you have this, you should do this, or I had this and this is what they told me to do, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they have all of these people coming on giving advice without qualifications, and not just without qualifications, but with a person who they can't even see. And this is such a dangerous situation. I mean, it's not dangerous to the people giving the advice because they're not being paid for it, so they're not any liability. But for the person who's taking it, I mean, they're really taking a chance. And if you really have a serious problem, and one thing we'll talk about with the injury prevention is how do you know when something is serious or whether you should, you know, just kind of back off and rest. But if you really have a serious issue and it's interfering with your dance to that point, it's worth it to you to go and get checked out. Because, I mean, and the interesting thing is when you look at all these people giving advice, it's rarely a therapist, doctor, nurse, trainer, anyone like that giving advice, because anyone like that already knows that I can't even see this person. I don't really know what's going on with them, you know. So a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing in that case. So I would really warn people against taking or asking for advice in forums like that, because it just seems to me a very hazardous situation, one that really concerns me. But anyway, so I digress.
That's a really good point, and I'm glad you said it.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's one of those things where you can't just hop on Buzz and go, hey, all of you, none of you know what you're talking about. You know? It's like, wow, that doesn't make you very popular on Buzz, does it? So, yeah. Like, the
one thing I will say that can be useful in forums is referrals to physicians who know how to treat dancers.
Absolutely.
Not so much a giving medical advice as so much as a, hey, I really like this doctor, or, you know, this, you know, certified sports chiropractor was awesome. But that's a totally different thing.
Yes, but you know, here's another thing related to that. When a dance instructor who's being paid to be a dance instructor gives advice like that, that is a professional issue, because it's out of the scope of practice, and it is and because someone is being paid for it, being paid for the dance instruction, that places them in a position of potential liability. So dance instructors, beware. If a student has a complaint, a pain, an injury, something like that, you need to tell them to get thee to the doctor and not try and give advice on that, because basically you can say, you know, it sounds like it's serious. I think you should get checked out. Tell me what your doctor says.
That's a really important point.
Oh yeah, I had a private student who had a lesson with me, and I heard later online that she has a knee issue, which she never told me about, and then told me that a woman she's taking classes with gave her exercises for it. And I thought, wow, that sounded a little bit unsafe, and you probably should have said something to me in your lesson, you know. So that's another thing. Is students need to be honest with their teachers. If you have a shoulder injury, make sure that you let your teacher know that you have a shoulder injury or a knee injury or a foot or whatever it is, so that your teacher can properly give you modifications for that. So there are a lot of the main responsibility falls on the student to fully inform the teacher and to be wise about what advice they are willing to take and from where. It's your body. No matter what mistakes anyone else makes, you're the one that has to live with it. You have to dance with it, or you might wind up not dancing with it.
Exactly. And from the teacher's end, there's actually, it is the student's responsibility to inform you, but sometimes you really have to push them. I have it in my classroom agreement, which includes the liability waiver that they've signed, says they have to disclose any issues and that they can do it privately or in front of the class or whatever. But I also, even if it's students who have been studying with me for years, I say that at the beginning of every single session. Hey, if anybody has anything new, anything persistent, anything that's bothering you, you have to let me know now. And, you'd be surprised how often people don't mention it until you ask.
Oh, you'd be surprised how often people don't even put it on the form. One time it really slapped me in the face big time. She signed the form, she put no injuries, and at the end of class she came to me and she said, oh, well, the reason that I couldn't do that whole undulation properly is because my L4 and L5 discs are fused. They were surgically fused in an operation. And I thought, I picked up her form because it was her first night in class, and I said, I think you need to add that on here. That's a small oversight, so students aren't always forthcoming with these things. So, you have to make sure that you keep up with that kind of a thing. So, yes, it's everyone's responsibility to do their part. So, but yeah,
even separate from even separate from the actual liability issue, we want our students to be safe, and we want our students to be happy. And as students, we want to be safe and be happy. So we can all pitch in.
If they hurt after they go to class, they don't come back. And nobody wants to hurt the next day. Nobody wants to remember dance class like that. They want to remember about what fun they had and about the cool thing they learned and about how they felt they made progress. That's what we always want. So we want to make sure that people are dancing safe. So as far as injury prevention, you wanted to talk about stretching. Stretching, all of the research on stretching has really turned itself over twice in probably the past 20 years. So a lot of old school teachers and old school coaches and old school PE teachers and all kinds of people like that are still kind of in the mode of you stretch before you exercise or you stretch before you dance or things like that. And that's not in tune with what the majority of the newer research is. And so the newer research basically tells us to warm up our muscles and save the deep stretching for after our activity. And at one point, when they first started saying that, they said, oh, well, that's going to reduce soreness and is going to reduce what's called DOMS, which is delayed onset muscle soreness. And that will reduce all of those things because it helps to dissipate the lactic acid that builds up in the muscles, which is what causes soreness. And then they found out that wasn't true either, that stretching afterwards did not diminish any kind of soreness. There was no connection to lactic acid, but they still recommended the stretching afterwards. And they talked about decreased performance in athletes when they stretched prior to activity rather than post-activity. And that research really kind of focused more on sports and things that really needed to generate power. And remember when we talked about power, we talked about that ability to generate a lot of force very quickly. Mm-hmm. And any kind of a sport that involves jumping, like volleyball, or really fast activity like sprinting, things like that require really fast muscle action. When your muscles are stretched and relaxed, you have to think about it like a rubber band, okay? So if you have a really tight rubber band and you pull it back and you fling it at somebody, it's going to go really fast and hard and it's going to hurt, right? So you take another rubber band and you pull it back not so hard, less tension, you fling it, it goes a little way, it falls down. So when muscles are like that, the more relaxed and stretched they are, kind of the less retention ability that they're going to have. So for an athlete that needs a lot of jump, a lot of bounce, a lot of quick power, stretching beforehand can really actually diminish your performance. So that was part of why this whole stretching beforehand is not the best thing came about. And that's it had kind of played into that. But then they started going back, and it's like, well, not everybody needs that. You know, other athletes and other kind of people doing activities need different things. So the most recent advice on stretching is that for most activities, it's best taken afterwards because the muscles are at the most warm. They're at the most ready to be stretched. And the ability to get a good deep stretch, which really increases flexibility long term, that's your best time to do it. But for some activities, we really need our muscles to be supple, and dance is one of them. Gymnastics is like that. Dance is like that. Probably figure skating you could count like that, although there's a certain amount of power with the jumping and figure skating as well. But so I guess that will leave that one out of the conversation. But for dancers and gymnasts, you need a lot of flexibility. So it does need to be worked into the beginning of your cycle of, you know, getting into practice and getting into class. But it has to be done smart. So the warm-up really does. So what that means is you need a warm-up first. You need a warm-up first, and the warm-up can progress into stretching, but not long static stretches, more dynamic stretches, you know, ones that don't just do, when I talk about static stretching, I mean going to the furthest point that you can go, hold it for 30 seconds, come back out of it, do it again a second time, a third time. That is static stretching, okay? And dynamic stretching is stretching that moves through the whole range of motion, but isn't about stop and hold, okay? That's the kind of stretching that works best for us in a warm-up sense.
So it sounds like things like, you know, shoulder rolls and big hip circles, things like that.
Yeah, but also things like the bigger body movement. So think of like bending over at the hips, flat back, and then collapsing down and curling the spine in and then rolling up. All of that warms up all those muscles in your back. And if you extend that to what you're coming up once you're warmed up, to opening up the chest and going into a little bit of a back bend, and you get a little bit of a stretch on the front of the body. And coming down, when you come down into that flat back, the further down you go with that flat back, you're putting the stretch on the hamstring. So there's a very delicate balance between the warm-up and the stretching. But we do need stretching beforehand. And people always think about this before class. And maybe you're doing it before rehearsal, or maybe your rehearsal is after class. But here's one of the things, though, that I think a lot of dancers don't think about is before a performance.
Oh, yeah.
It's so important. and I tell you, it's the short performances where you need the most warm-up. Because if you think about this, you think about if you're doing, say you're doing a 25-minute club show, okay, a restaurant show, whatever, party, whatever it is you're doing this whole set. The first song usually doesn't involve a lot of big back bends and heavy things and, you know, down on the floor with your floor work and splits and drops and all this kind of stuff. Usually the first song is you know, you're cruising through your audience, you have a lot of traveling movement, things like that. So this is a time when your body's kind of getting warmed up, okay? And as you're moving and you're doing bigger movements, you're kind of easing into the deep parts of your performance. So now I'm not saying that you're not going to warm up backstage. What I'm saying is that you're giving your body extra warm-up as you're easing into the show. You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're doing a theatrical performance. You have a 3.5-minute piece, and it involves floor work and splits and back bends. It ends with a Turkish drop. You have no warm-up if you don't, built into your performance. You have to do a lot of it backstage so that you're ready when you go on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the short performances with extreme movements is where people can really get themselves into trouble.
Absolutely. And even beyond the safety point, your dancing is just better if you warm up before you perform.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. When I did my first couple episodes of my podcast, I figured, I'd be talking for a while, so I didn't bother to warm up. I was so bad, I threw out my entire first day's footage and had to reshoot the whole thing. It was that miserable.
Yeah. Yes, we all have to learn these things, don't we?
Absolutely. Luckily, I got to do it in front of, my footage that I got to throw out, but as opposed to in front of other people.
Yeah, and if you have, and other things you have to take into consideration are, did you have a long car ride before you got there? Is the weather cold? If you did, you really need extra because your body needs to, those muscles need to raise their temperature, needs to increase the lubrication in the joints, all of that stuff. You have to rev up. You have to kind of get your engine primed just like you would for a machine. So you need to give yourself time to do all of those things before you go on.
Absolutely. So what are some of the more common injuries that belly dancers get?
Well, there's a lot of different areas where people can have an injury. For example, like in the shoulders. Shoulders are very tricky. Shoulders have only one bony attachment between your arm and your torso. Everything else in that whole shoulder joint is soft tissue and connective tissue. It's not. There's just only one bone. It's your clavicle, your collarbone. It's the only thing connecting your arm to your ribs at the sternum. Everything else is all soft tissue. And that's one reason why it's so prone to injury is because it's all small muscles. And if you have some that are tight, you can pull on the joint in an inefficient manner. If you of course, there's all kinds of things that may not be caused by dance can be exacerbated by dance. So of course, things like arthritis. If you have if you have it, like this is more common in knees, but some people have it in shoulders as well, where you can hear that little clicking or grinding sound or popping in your knees when you bend them deeply, and that's like the interior surface of the joint where the ball meets the socket. It's not smooth in there, so you can have injuries in there that can be caused from wear. It could be caused from when you played sports in high school. Things like that you're still having to deal with. It can also, here's another one, is that if you handle a sword, some of these swords are really heavy, and you have to be careful. You have to be careful as that you don't strain and that you don't strain and overextend that, because that weight all the way at the end of the arm puts a lot of stress on that joint. If you think about this, you hold a gallon of milk. If you hold a gallon of milk close to your body, you can hold it a pretty long time. Hold it with your halfway out, it's harder. Hold it all the way out with your arm extended, it's even tougher. So it's called the lever arm, and the longer that lever arm is, the more energy it takes and the more stresses it's putting on your joint. So it's when you're taking a sword and you're moving it around, you're maneuvering it, and you're doing it with an almost extended arm, you're putting a lot of stress on the shoulder, which means that you can, if your shoulder is not strong enough, let's go back to that element of muscular strength. In the case of the shoulder, muscular strength protects your joint, and that's actually true in a lot of joints, but really very true in your shoulder because of the lack of extra bone in there, that's what gives us our shoulders all that mobility, though. So your muscles in your shoulders need to be strong, and also for holding your arms up. And think about when you take your arms and you hold them up to the side in a basic position. How many times have you heard your students say at the end of a drill, "Oh, my arms are tired," or "Oh, my shoulders," and they have to drop their shoulders and give them a break? Right? Right. Yeah, well, that's the endurance. That's the endurance in that muscle that goes right across the cap of the shoulder, that medial deltoid. And getting the proper, recruitment on your muscles, not just thinking about raising the arm, but thinking about, engaging the upper back to support that, to take some of that work off of that small little muscle in the shoulder, it's really unfair, you know. I was one of my students, my private students yesterday. I was trying to work with her on her arms, and she was saying, well, and I said, stop thinking about it as an arm position. I said, start thinking about it as a chest and upper back position. The arms will follow. And I told her to put her arms up, stretch across the front of your chest, pull back, you know, pull your shoulder blades a little bit back together so that your chest opens up. That's your position. All of a sudden, the arms aren't burning anymore because you've got a lot of extra muscle to support it. So for people who don't recruit all the muscle that they have available to them to help keep those arms up or to move them in a supported way, they're placing extra stress on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
I think that might be one of the causes of that kind of visible tension that you sometimes see in people's arms, even when the positioning is right. It looks like they're kind of gripping to hold it there. I wonder if that might be related.
Yeah, they do, because you know what happens is if you don't engage your back to help with this and you don't relax your chest to not fight it, then you wind up with the next first line of your body for most people, the first line of help that comes in and says, you know, I'm coming to the rescue, deltoids, is your traps, okay? And it's the upper part of your traps. It's the one that connects from the base of your skull and kind of, if you put your fingers like at the base of your skull and you follow that diagonal down and out to your shoulder, it's the muscle that raises your shoulders up. Like if you squish your ears up into your shoulders, that's your traps, okay? The upper part of your trapezius muscle. And they're very good at holding up. They're really strong. You know, when you get tense, they creep up, and you have to relax them. You work on the computer a lot, they creep up, and then you have to take some time to do some head rolls or some shoulder rolls and kind of get them all loosened up again. But they're very willing to come in and help. Unfortunately, they give us that look of having our shoulders in our ears, so and our neck disappears. So,
excellent. So in addition to shoulders, are there any other common injuries that happen more often with belly dancers?
Well, yeah, backs, low back things. And a lot of people actually come into dance already having, maybe some bad posture or other problems because they just sit too long at their desk and they already have some back pain. So it definitely can be exacerbated by dancing improperly, especially. The things, everyone's bodies are different. Sometimes, dancers, they look at someone like Rachel Bryce and they see there's, 90-degree back bends. Not every back is capable of doing that, and not everyone's back has to do that. Not every dancer has to do that. So you have to know what works on your body. And if something is, if something is out of the range of where your flexibility is, because some people, just by nature, because of the way their ligaments are, because the way their joints are slightly different, have more flexibility than other people, and that's an anatomical reality, and we have to dance in the bodies that we have. We can't force ourselves to dance like a body form that we don't have. So, knowing what is realistic for your body, and that's not to say that we can't do more than we do, but meaning not be unrealistic about expectations. And so the other thing is protecting our backs. One of the reasons that people sometimes develop back pain with dance is because of a lack of strength in the muscles on the other side, which are your abdominal muscles. Strong abdominal muscles protect your back. So you have to make sure that your abdominal muscles are strong, and that way your back doesn't have too much stress. So this is another one of those examples of one muscle overworking to compensate for what another muscle is not doing. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of where low back strain comes from. So that's one of the things we need to, when we talk to students and we tell them to put their pelvis in a neutral position, or some instructors, they term it differently. Some will say tuck your pelvis. Some will just say drop your tailbone. I prefer to say put your pelvis in a neutral position. The way I describe that position to someone is I have them find the two little bumps on the front of their hips. That's your ASIS, your anterior superior iliac spine. It's a little bump on your hip, in the front crest of your hip. And it's pretty evident. Most people can find it really, really quickly. And if you think about those two bumps and your pubic bone, and if you think about arranging them so that they're all in one flat plane, like a wall, like there would be points on a wall, when you do that, and when you do that by engaging your lower part of your abdomen, your transverse abdominis, which is the deepest part of your abdominal group, when you do it from there, it allows the lower back to relax, the tailbone comes down, pelvis comes into that safe position, and most of all, it's engaging the abdomen, which means it's helping to protect the back. And that's one of the big reasons why we need to be really careful about that pelvic position, especially with beginners. We got to teach them to get that posture so that it becomes automatic, so it strengthens it as they're using it, and it lets them learn all of their basic movements and isolations and shapes to learn them properly in the right alignment. Because again, the muscles that fire together, wire together. Good habits, safe dance habits.
So this is a little bit straying from the topic, but what do you recommend for helping students connect with that kind of deep abdominal support? Because sometimes when I've said, hug in or, let your belly support you, what I get is a lot of people sucking in their stomachs, which is not quite what I was going for.
That is a really tough one. What works for one person does not work for another person. Sometimes, and it's amazing, and when I first learned to do belly rolls, and I'm not a fabulous belly roller, my instructor was just unbelievable. I like, if I ever compare myself to her, I mind nothing. But one of the things I learned in trying to help students with, because help them develop their own belly rolls, is that feedback, external feedback. Sometimes just putting your hand on a muscle helps you to get a feedback loop. So you try and engage it, but your hand can feel the difference when the muscle is engaged or not engaged. So that gives you that positive feedback to your brain. Oh, that's how I do it. I can feel that I'm doing it. I can feel that it's being done. My hand can tell. So that's something that works for a lot of people, is to, sometimes they need to just kind of like put their hand on the center of their abdomen, even very lightly, while they do certain hip movements, just to remember to keep that in. And eventually, they outgrow that and they don't need to do that anymore. So external feedback really helps. Another one is to make nothing else work. So laying down, and while you're laying down, pulling that stomach in. So you're relaxing the back, you're relaxing the legs, you're not asking anything else to work. And visual and manual feedback work. Sometimes people will put like a book on their stomach, and when they pull in, they can see that the book moves. Everyone learns differently, and that's one of the things that a good teacher does, is to kind of have a whole bunch of ways of communicating something so that one of them will click. And you're always finding new ones.
So we were talking a little bit about the importance of the transverse abdominis and posture, but what are the other muscle groups that are important for belly dancers to know about?
In the abdomen itself, or they're in other areas?
In general.
Well, in your abdomen, you have 4 layers. So you have your transverse abdominis, which is the very deep one that goes across on the low part of your abdomen. Then you have your internal and external obliques, which run in opposite diagonals, one running inward and upward, and the one other running outward and upward. And those are the things that execute all of our help us execute all of our hip lifts. When I'm talking about when they're generated from the core, not when they're pushing from the leg, by the way. And to help us to twist. Anytime that you twist your hips, like to begin a figure 8, that's your obliques working in an opposite pair. Anytime that you do any kind of an accent, that really gooey, wonderful Egyptian stuff where you maybe pull one side up and in a little more, and then you take the other side, so you're kind of working a little asymmetrically there. Of course, your psoas is going to also go in with that, which is not technically an abdominal muscle. It's more attached to your spine and to your thigh, but it tends to jump into the party with the abdomen on a lot of things, especially anything that flexes the torso or helps, or where the hip has a bit of flexion or the pelvis has a tilt to it. And the reason for that is because it's attached near about the top of what you would consider the low back, and then it runs along the spine, and it runs diagonally down through your pelvis, but it doesn't attach to anything on your pelvis. It attaches to the thigh bone all the way at the top. So the pelvis is kind of almost like strung onto the psoas muscle like a bead on a string. So, well, that's kind of the way it is.
I love that visual.
So when you contract that muscle and you pull up on that thigh bone, the pelvis just kind of tilts because it's connected and there's a ball and socket joint there. So it's going to do a little bit of a rotation. So that's where, like, a lot of those really gooey, deep movements that will engage that. It's not one of those muscles where we can kind of feel it from the outside. It's a super deep muscle. It's all the way running down, like I said, from the spine to your inside of your thigh. So a lot of times we don't feel it unless maybe we injure it. But that's not a really common injury either. It's more the superficial muscles are the ones that get injured, and joints. I mean, joints are the big site for that. The big site for injuries. Things like knees. Knees are a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and knees are so complicated. And if you look at the anatomy of the knee, you've got muscles crossing across the front of it and across the back and coming in the side, and you have small stabilizer muscles on your knees. And because knees are so far down on your body, there's a whole lot of weight above them, which means it's really easy to put torsion on your knees, which means a force that's rotating through the joint rather than going straight through the joint. This joint is meant to bend and to straighten. It's not meant to turn. So anytime we do something like chaîné turns or a 3-step turn or a spin or anything like that, we're placing some degree of torsion on our knees. Anytime that we kind of rotate on our leg like that, so it's in a way like I call it a flip-flop turn. I'm not sure what other people might call it, where, when you step onto it and then you keep your weight on that leg and then you kind of just make a little half turn with no weight on the other leg. And hopefully you can picture this. So it would be kind of the same thing as if you were doing like an arabesque type turn. Would be the same thing. Yeah. So, but you would think about that like with a bent knee, for example. But the big thing that protects the knees most is having strong quads, because your quads cross the knee joint, and when your quads are strong, it can help stabilize that knee joint while a certain amount of torsion in the leg is happening. And then you're in the safe zone. But if your quads are weak, that's one of the biggest dangers of putting yourself in place for a knee injury.
So are there any other muscle groups that you think belly dancers need to know about?
I think we kind of neglect our ankles and our feet. We think about, you go to the gym, you maybe do squats, you're doing lunges, you're doing tons of crunches. If you're really good and conscientious, you're doing some side raises for your deltoids and some pulls for your back, keep everything going. But a lot of times we forget about our feet. And so, there's a whole bunch of what we call intrinsic muscles in your feet. And these are the small muscles that don't cross a major joint, but just kind of run between the smaller bones in your feet. Mm-hmm. And they need to be really strong for your balance. If you're going to keep balance on one leg, these muscles have to be up to the job. And, of course, all the muscles that cross your ankles, you want to make sure that they're good and strong because you don't want a twisted ankle. Anytime you're working up on releve, you need to make sure your whole ankle joint is all supported. And there's a lot of small supporting muscles in there as well. So I think that we tend to ignore our feet a bit, and it's one of the easiest ones to tend to without a lot of fuss because it doesn't really take much equipment, or there's a lot of things that we can do without just when we have a spare moment. Like you can keep a tennis ball under your desk and you can, roll your feet on the tennis ball. Just kind of give them a little massage and get the cramps out of them. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that you can do is what's called toe writing. I actually found this on the ballet site, and it's funny. It's like you just kind of prop your leg. I'm just sitting here doing this right now while I'm talking to you. So I just have one leg with my calf propped up, on my other leg because I happen to be sitting on the floor at the moment. And I'm going to point my toe, and I'm going to pretend like I have a marker on my toe, and I'm going to just start to write letters. Just writing in the air. It's kind of like the foot version of the rib cage drill where you write letters with your rib cage. If you've ever tried that one. And what this does is it takes your feet through a whole bunch of different angular type of movements. And the way that our foot actually does that is by changing the contraction of the muscles between small parts of the foot. With all of those tarsals, the bones that come from your toe and come up towards your ankle, all of those have muscles between them. And so when we do little, what seems like funny things, like writing or scribbling with our toes, then we're exercising all of those muscles in lots and lots of different directions and lots of different ways. So we're strengthening our feet.
Cool. So are there any other exercises or particular types of training that you recommend?
Well, I think that dancers really need more than just dance. A lot of times you'll hear dancers say, oh, well, I dance a lot, so that's my only exercise. But I really believe that dancers need more than just dancing to dance safely and to dance at their best. While dance is going to strengthen your core, we need more strength than we have to tap into for performance. So training beyond the demand of our actual dancing is really necessary for us, in my opinion. And I think that if you aren't into doing a lot of exercise and you really just want the most bang for your buck, I think if dancers did nothing else other than a good, strong core workout and some upper body work to strengthen their upper back and their shoulders. Those would probably be the two biggest bang for your buck improvements in your dance, because the core work is going to give you the stability that brings you great posture and grace, and the core work's going to also strengthen your obliques, which is going to strengthen your hip movement, give you clearer hip movement, sharper hip movement, and with work on your upper back and your shoulders, you're going to have better arm posture. So I think if people did nothing else other than that, as far as external training outside of dance, those would be the two things I would say.
Gotcha. And do you have any other recommendations around injury prevention specifically? I mean, we've talked about stretching, we've talked a little about strengthening, but do you have any way that you would draw that together as kind of an injury prevention plan?
Well, as far making sure that you're warmed up, making sure you know the limits of kind of where you are currently at, and if you want to progress, and as far as things like everyone says, oh, they want a deeper back bend, or they want this, or they want that. Well, if you want something, you're going to have to do it progressively. Nothing is sudden. You can't just throw yourself down on the floor with a Turkish drop, even though my dance partner wanted to do that. She actually regretted that later. She had the knee problem to prove it. You can't do that. You have to analyze it. Oh, okay, well, if I want that bigger back bend, what do I need? You need more glute strength to support that back bend. You need more abdominal flexibility, you need more back flexibility, which means progressive stretching. It means working at it slowly and taking your improvement incrementally rather than shocking your body all of a sudden and just expecting you're going to be able to do it. I think the other thing is to be aware of what things are an immediate problem and what things are maybe I need a break. It's like the big warning signs are if you get a sharp pain that's repeated on a movement, you really got to stop. You have to stop. You have to look at how you're doing it, figure out if maybe your alignment's off, figure out if maybe you got something else going on, something in your background or your prior injury that's getting flared up. Anything that's sharp, sudden, comes on very suddenly, happens repeatedly with the movement are really warning signs that something is wrong, and it's not I'm going to work through this kind of a thing. It's no, you got to stop and fix it because you can really hurt yourself. If you're sore after class, maybe you worked hard. That's okay. You're still sore a couple days later. Maybe you injured yourself a little bit. Probably back off. Don't work the section of your body that's not feeling well for a couple of days. Go back into it slowly and see what happens. It's the sudden and in sharp and acute things, popping things, grinding things, all the things like that. Those feelings are the ones that you really got to watch out for right away.
Mm-hmm. Now, if somebody thinks they might have something going on, but they're not sure yet, one thing that I've always wondered about is, how long should I rest or should I go to the doctor the next day? Do you have any recommendations around, kind of short-term triage?
No, basically, that's really kind of up to the person and how much pain they're having. I mean, if you're sore, and you have to learn the difference between muscular soreness because that's kind of it's like if you do a heavy lifting session or if you do a lot of squats or a lot of lunges and your glutes get sore, things like that. That's a good sore. That's a sore that means that your workout pushed your muscular ability beyond what it currently was, but your body will repair itself and it will repair itself stronger. Now, if you can't move, or you have sharp pain going on, or you really kind of can't even, do your regular functioning, then you have to back off. And even in the case of being sore in a good way, you need to give your body recovery time before you go back and do something again. How much time? Like I said, you usually lower body takes longer to recover than upper body. Usually, if you get your arms are sore from a heavy veil practice or something like that, usually a day is about a day, maybe 2 days. Leg and glute soreness usually hangs around just a little bit longer. I actually had to learn this the hard way. We had a teacher who didn't tell us why in our college class and took us to the gym and basically pounded us to death for like 90 minutes with everything. I mean, it was crazy. He had us doing push-ups on the gym benches. He had us doing sprints. He had us doing everything. We were so, completely wiped out. And then our assignment was for the next 7 days to record what was sore and what wasn't sore anymore. It's like, wow, we would have believed you if you told us you didn't have to do this to us. But his point was that the larger muscle groups of the lower body will stay sore longer than the upper body. Like I said, I would have believed him if he just told me. But I will never forget that lesson because of it. So, yeah, you have to give your lower body a little bit more time. Back pain's a little different. Back pain is, that tends to hang around and maybe something that you want to get checked more sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So if there was one thing that people take away from this call, what would you want it to be?
I think that I would want it to be that they have to think of themselves, at least on some level, as an athlete, as a dancer. I mean, you can be a hobby athlete or you can be a professional athlete, but you need to think of the way you use your body in dance just the way an athlete would to do a sport, and to make sure that you're taking care of it properly make sure that you're cross-training it properly, that you're listening to what your body is telling you, and that you look at it analytically in the same way when it comes to movement.
And is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before we start taking questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, before we take questions, I just want to say that this has been really helpful, but obviously you are a font of knowledge. And so if people wanted to learn more from you, how could they do that?
Well, I put a lot of things out there. I think that one of the biggest vehicles of where I put information out is on the Daily Belly Dance Quickies. When Saturday is a strength and stretch, which is the things that generally apply to what we were talking about, and of course the other days are all other things regarding to pertaining to belly dance. A lot of times I will put more extended articles on my blog. As a matter of fact, there's on my blog site there are articles on the science of shimmies, about warming up and stretching, about fitness for dancers. There's several of the things that we touched on today. There's longer posts, elaborating them and giving visuals for a lot of that stuff. And also, I travel and teach. So I'm, going to be at several places this year. Some of them I can name, some of them I can't divulge just yet. And so I'm coming in the direction of hopefully a lot of people coming up this year, and in my classes. So that's and also I'm just about to launch. I just finished testing online video lessons, and so because I'm also a trainer, I can also do a certain amount of exercise coaching through those video sessions as well. So.
Excellent. So would that be like one-on-one, or do you have group classes in mind?
Yes, it is going to be one-on-one. It's not. I don't have. Haven't tested out anything with group classes at this point, so they will be one-on-one privates online. Yes.
Cool. Well, I will send out links to the Daily Belly Dance Quickies and also to your blog. But those of you who are listening on the webcast, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you will see links to both of those things there. Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to open it up to questions. So the way this is going to work is if you're listening on the webcast, there's a little box on the left-hand side that you can use to type in your questions. And if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *2. So if you have any questions for Mahin, now's a great time to ask. And for those of you who are on Skype, that's *2 on your Skype keypad, not *2 on your keyboard. Okay. All right, well, we wait for the questions to come in. I actually have a question that somebody sent me in advance. She's in Australia and can't listen live right now. But she wants to, you answered this a little bit, but she says, I would like to ask, does Mahin have any plans to put together a DVD of strengthening and stretching exercises for belly dancers? I know she has a good playlist available on her website, but a DVD with a couple of workouts and maybe a playlist we could choose from is something I would buy. And that was Pam's question.
I have gotten a couple of emails like that and a couple of comments on the YouTube videos as well. I would love to do that. I pretty much everything I do is a one-person operation, and I'm hoping to put that into the mix this year. I haven't quite figured out exactly how to implement that, but it's definitely something that's on my wish of things to do, and definitely something that people have asked me for, and it's a possibility. I can't say that when it's coming because I haven't started the project yet, but it's definitely something in mind and something that I'm looking to do. So I would really like to put together perhaps like a workout video of injury preventing exercises, just particularly to strengthen the muscles that protect the joints that most get injured.
I would sign up for that. Okay, so I don't see any questions. If you are listening in and you have a question, you can press *2 on your phone or *2 on your Skype keypad, or type your question in at the box at left. And if we don't have any questions, I would like to ask those of you who are listening, what was the most important thing that you took away from this call? Either the most important thing you learned, your biggest aha moment, any ideas that tickled you. So I'd love to hear that as well. So again, that's *2, or you can type it in on the box it left. I think it's kind of like tipping. Nobody wants to be the first one. Okay, we've got a hand raised.
Oh, all right.
All right. So our caller is Uranitsa. Hi, Uranitsa.
Hello?
Hi there.
Hi.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, wow.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I actually was nervous to raise my hand just because I joined in late because I got home late. But so if you've already talked about this and you don't want to repeat it, that's totally fine, and I'll just listen to the recording. But
oh, that's okay. I repeat myself all the time. Go ahead.
I was wondering, you probably already talked about this in terms of generally speaking, but posture in different styles of belly dance. So I was under the impression that keeping a neutral pelvis is something that one does by slightly engaging the lower abs and keeping the glutes loose to minimize the S-shaped curve in your back. Not eliminate it, but just minimize it, especially because a lot of beginners have a tendency to like start crunching their back vertebrae, the lower lumbar region, when they get really, I don't know, honed in on like doing certain moves. So just to keep the pelvis neutral is the best spot. Recently I came across a book by a well-known belly dancer who says that forget about this business about tucking, which is what I call it too sometimes, not in the RuPaul sense of the word, but in the belly dance sense of the word. Basically, you don't have to worry about that. Just stand up straight and then everything will be fine, kind of. Like, and I was wondering, and she also, I think, said, stick your chest out a bit, and I was under the impression that it's more stylistically Egyptian to be, sorry, but for lack of a better word, tits over toes, and it was more vintage oriental to be with a slightly, I guess I can call it closed rib cage. Like I think about it as standing up tall, like King Kong style, like banging your, or Tarzan style, I guess, but still like lightly stitching your lower ribs together just a little bit so you're not splayed out like a fish. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the stylistic. I don't know if that's like true anymore. I'm like doubting my instruction.
Well, you know, there definitely is differences in posture between things like an old school AMCAP style, an Egyptian style, and a tribal style. I mean, they're very different postures. But the portion of the posture about holding your pelvis neutral, I don't think really that's negotiable. If you actually look at like the AMCAP style, where you've got a lot of times they do have like that sway back kind of a look. I don't think any of the dancers who danced that for 30 years are grateful at this point that they did it. So, you know, I mean, that you're putting a lot of stress on that low back when you're doing that. And just because it's part of the vintage look of the style doesn't mean it's good for your body.
Right.
So that's something to consider. Now, I don't think it's wise to tell anyone to just stand up straight and everything will take care of itself. If I mean, personally, if I just said that in class, I would see 4 different, at least, versions of standing up straight and about 4 different ways of taking care of it, which may or may not work. So I don't believe in being that non-specific about instruction. I think it's better to give more ways to understanding something rather than just say, oh, stand up straight and everything will be fine. Because when we don't engage the pelvis, and you're exactly right, when you were talking about engaging the lower abdominal muscles to give more posterior tilt to the pelvis, which means that slight tuck from what is natural for us for that lumbar curve, but not completely removing the curve. And what we're doing is, and this is something, and maybe you were not on this part of the call, and I totally don't mind saying this again. I think I could say it 10 times, and it may not be enough for some people, that by giving that engagement in the lower abdomen, you are engaging your abdomen. When you engage a muscle on one side of your body or one side of a bone or one side of a joint, you help the other muscle on the opposite side has to relax a bit, which means you're letting your lower back not work hard. And that's how we would protect our back.
Right.
So you don't want your lower back muscles to work that hard. They tend to spasm and seize up and get unbalanced, and then one side gets stronger than the other, and then you wind up with hips that are unbalanced, and that can lead to all kinds of problems all the way further down the kinetic chain into your knees and things like that. So, it's like I had mentioned a few minutes ago. If anything, core work is one of the things that if you do nothing else will change how you dance. And you actually, when you first said your question, you brought up a very important point about sometimes when you tell people just to take their pelvis and put it in neutral or tuck or whatever the terminology someone wants to use, the first impulse of a lot of people is to squeeze their glutes, because that will push the pelvis that way. But that also freezes up a whole lot of muscle that we need to be supple to create hip movement. So that's not a very productive way for us to do that. And it also doesn't engage the abdomen to protect the back.
So does that mean that you're not a fan of the whole Suhaila butt squeeze to move the hips?
That is a different. There's a lot of different ways to execute one directional movement. You can push through the leg, you can lift through the obliques and the psoas, you can use your glutes to support something, and there's a lot of ways that you can get the same movement. And you know what? And that's what makes one person's dancing look different from another. And many of those ways are all anatomically safe. They just give a different look. And for example, you can here's a simple example. If you stand on one leg and you have the other leg behind you, and you kind of do like a butt, what I call a butt pop move, you kind of straighten the leg a little bit, and then you kind of like pop your butt backwards. You can do that with just the leg. You can do that also by contracting the glute at the top of it really fast, and that adds a whole bunch of extra pow to that movement. So how we recruit muscle and how we do that gives different look and texture and intensity to movement. So it's not to say that one thing is wrong. And I think that's one of the big things that we have in our dance community is people like to be right and wrong, and like to say, well, they like to be right, and they like to say other people are wrong, right? But if we all executed exactly the same way, all of our dancing would look pretty much the same. But by having different ways to do things, we get different textures, different looks, different intensities, and we get different character to our dancing. So, no, I don't say that that whole glute philosophy is wrong. I'm just saying it's just one way to do it.
Can I applaud for a second?
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Nadira, could I ask another one? Sorry.
Absolutely.
In terms of that glute squeeze, I come from a ballet background, and a lot of my students do too. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about dancers approaching belly dance, how does the belly dance posture relate to ballet posture or jazz dance posture or some other form of dance? Is it similar? Is it different? Is it anatomically one better than the other, so to speak? I don't know. Again, if you already talked about this, you can just say, or the recording.
No,
it's okay.
completely cool. I think that when I get students who have had a ballet background, they usually have great arm and upper body carriage because it's been bred into them, and that whole, broadening the chest, opening up, and supporting the arms and engaging through the upper back. They usually, people who have studied ballet for a while and did well at it, usually are really good at that. They also tend to be a little bit. I tend to see a lot of locked knees from people in ballet because they have this super straight leg when they're dancing. And so the softness in our knees, I think it was, I'm going to say the wrong person. I can't get her name at the moment. As soon as I hang up, I'm going to remember her name. But anyway, I remember she called it a micro bend. But that's really what we need in our knees, because when we think about moving our hips, and the way I always explain it to students is, we can't have our knees locked. If we have our knees locked, we severely limit what we can do with our hips, because our feet, it's all geometry. If our feet are going to be planted in one place and we want our hip to move something has to give in between point A and point B, and that thing is our knee. It doesn't mean it has to drive the movement. It can drive the movement if we want it to, for extra power, extra, lean or extra, bigness to the movement. But if our hip is going to move and our foot's going to stay still, our knee has to accommodate that. So if our knee is straight, and ballet dancers do tend to come into class and lock those knees right up, then they're going to hinder their movement. So I think that's one of the things in the overall scheme of body posture that I definitely see with people who've had a lot of ballet.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Great questions. Okay. So if there's anybody else who has a question, you can press *2 to raise your hand on the phone, or *2 on your Skype keypad, or you can type that in at the question and answer box at left. And I'd also love to hear what your biggest takeaways from today's call were. So Oranitza's opened up the floodgates. Don't be shy. And Oranitza, if you have another question, I've put you back on mute, but you can raise your hand again with *2. We'd love to hear from you again if you have more questions. Okay, while we're waiting, I want to share my takeaway. And this wasn't necessarily the most important thing I learned, but it was the thing that tickled me the most. And that was, you have to dance in the body you have. Was it you have to dance in the body you're in, or you have to dance with the body you have?
Well, you have to dance in the body that you have. Yeah, I mean, you could say it either way, and that changes. That body changes. If you dance your whole lifetime, the things you do at 20 and 30, you're probably not going to do at 50. But that's one of the beauties of this dance style is it's not like something that's very harsh like ballet, where there comes a time when you just can't get on point anymore, or you're, for whatever reason that, you can't do those split leaps anymore. I mean, there's things we may have to give up, but for all in all, the majority of our dance style remains accessible to us for a very, very long portion of our lives. And it's adaptable enough that we can enjoy it for a long time and continue to get the health benefits out of it for a long time.
Well, that's a beautiful thought, and I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think I'm going to close here. Thank you so much, Mahin. This has been lots of geeky fun. And really useful and important stuff.
This much anatomy in a long time. It's been great.
If we hadn't been at this for 90 minutes, I would say let's do more. But I think we do have to let everybody here on the East Coast get ready for bed.
It has been already. Time flies, huh?
Doesn't it? Yes, we'll have to do this again another time. And again, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you all for putting up with our slow start with our technical difficulties. This is the end of the call, but the conversation doesn't have to end. So we have a private Facebook group for the Clubhouse, and I'll send you an email shortly that will include an invitation to that. I'll also include a link to our call recording, to the Daily Belly Dance Quickies, and also Mahin's blog. And I'm also going to ask for your feedback. So if you have any ideas for topics or speakers or ways that I can improve the Clubhouse, I'd love to hear it. Our next call has not been scheduled yet, but I have chosen and my next guest. That's Layla Lanty from California, and we're going to be talking about a topic related to Arabic language and to the importance of lyrics in the dance. So I'm really excited about finalizing that topic, and I'll send out an email to the group as soon as I have those details. The other thing that I want to say is that the Clubhouse is the come-on-in kind of Clubhouse, not the no boys allowed kind. So if you know anybody who would enjoy these calls, you can invite them by sending them to taktaba.com. That's spelled taktaba.com/clubhouse. And until next time, happy dancing. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.